Good evening and welcome to Metropol Debrief, the show that takes a deep dive into socio-economic and policy matters that affect you and I. I am Terry Ann Chibet, and tonight I'm standing in for Ondiro Oganga. Now, over the last 2 weeks, we have taken a look back at some of the top issues that Metropol Debrief shone the spotlight on, of course, issues ranging from Kenya's level of food security to the growing prevalence of cancer in Kenya. Today, we'll deep dive further into these topics. I will be joined by economist Tony Watima, who will help us unravel the economic and policy implications of the issues that we will be discussing over the next 45 minutes. Also, we'd love you to be part of the conversation on Twitter. The handle is @MetropolTVKE. The hashtag is Metropol Debrief. And remember, we are live also on YouTube and on Facebook. That's Metropol TV Kenya for both. Now, let's start off with food and nutrition security, which is one of the big 4 development priorities that are being implemented by the government of Kenya. Now, under this pillar, the government hopes to achieve 100% food and nutrition security in the country by the year 2022. Among measures the government is taking to attain that objective include putting 700,000 acres of arable land under cultivation, that's through public and private partnerships, increasing the average income of farmers by 34%, creating 1,000 agro-processing small and medium enterprises that will hopefully create about 600,000 new jobs, increasing the contribution of agriculture to the GDP, that's from the current 26% to 48%. It also hopes to achieve a 27% reduction of malnutrition among children under the age of 5, and of course cutting the number of food insecure Kenyans by 50%, reducing the cost of food as a percentage of income by about 47%. But to implement these measures, the government has allocated 59.1 billion shillings out of the nearly 460 billion shillings that was allocated towards the Big 4 agenda that's in the 2019-2020 budget. Now, that's barely 13% of the Big 4 budget allocation. But as things currently stand, more and more Kenyans are facing acute starvation in the wake of the prevailing dry weather conditions. According to the National Drought Management Authority, nearly 3 million Kenyans are facing acute food shortage. That's almost double the number that was recorded in May. Well, let's now engage with our economist, Tony. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight. And of course, you've been on the show for quite a while. Just looking at those numbers we're talking about, the allocation of budget to the Big 4 agenda vis-a-vis what has been put into agriculture. Sounds like a joke to me.
I don't think so. I think those are sufficient funds looking at the kind of budget we have and looking at government obligations. I think those are sufficient. But the problem is that...
Really?
The problem is we identify the problem wrongly. First is that government looks at the problem as a supply side. It's a demand side. The problem with food security itself is an income problem. It's not that we lack those produce. One of the main things that we look at is that people are not able to afford food in itself. I think the biggest way and the best way government will have handled food security, especially if you're talking about starvation specifically, is disbursement of cash on these areas that are food insecure.
Cash to who? To the local government or directly
to the people? Now that one improves the logistics.
So that's a social security aspect.
Because the problem is the logistics problem, that there is food in places and that food cannot reach in specific places where people are starving. And so it's a logistical issue and an income problem. But when you're saying that we are bringing a supply side issue, that we are increasing irrigation schemes, increasing all that. We've done that for a period of time, and if you look at all those kind of, you look at World Bank doesn't even fund projects of irrigation schemes because it's failed in many places. Because
so you're not a believer in irrigation?
I believe it's the best way to go around it is give it to the private sector. Government should not handle it. Government should lease land, and then that one is government can take it over from there. So the problem is that we are identifying the problem itself, but the problem is not a supply side, it's a demand side. So identification of the problem is the biggest issue. So if you look at those kind of cash, especially like, let's pick out strategic grain reserve. If you put that cash in cash disbursement that we are talking about, these are people where people are starving, you will find that private sector itself will try and move food to that place. So there's an incentive to move food in those places. And so,
but can they afford it?
Because people can afford it, so long as you're giving cash as government directly to the people. Private sector will have an incentive to move that.
Doesn't then that build a, some sort of dependence to government and not the entrepreneurship and farming and basically, self-independence?
The issue will be, it's not a sustainable thing. The moment we find that ourselves that we are facing a food insecure problem, that's when government comes in. Instead of, we are trying to remodel it. Instead of government moving food on that side, why doesn't government give cash to those people specifically? And private sector and the logistics itself will work. The moment we work on those logistics, we are able to address that food insecure problem.
All right.
Because we have food.
But that's only addressing the starvation problem.
The starvation where people are food insecure.
But what about the sustainability of that? There's places where, I mean, look at the case of Israel, for instance.
Yes.
It's a complete desert, among other countries.
Yes.
But through irrigation and such like solutions, then the country is food sufficient.
Yeah, that's true. But we look at the level of commercialization of the economy itself in terms of agriculture. I think if you're a farmer, you get a lot of money. If you generally out of agriculture itself, I think the economy itself is diversified very well, that people are able to afford food. The problem in Kenya is that, especially look at Kenya has 2/3 is arid and semi-arid places. It means those people are they face high risks of food insecure problem because they don't do subsistence farming. Yeah. So how do you come up when these people are facing starvation or are facing hunger? It's an income problem itself that these people cannot afford it at that point in time. It's not about moving that food on that place.
So it's like startup money?
Yes. So unless the problem itself also is because the level of economy we are today, that the income issue and also food itself is expensive. So unless we address the side of the income issue, that food is accessible first and people can afford that food, it has to go in tandem, the two of them.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a problem that government has. You can put all this money, but we've tried it for a very period of time, but it will not work. Will not solve the food insecurity problem. And the biggest problem,
we look at the supply
and the biggest fallacy that in economics that we see many people say is about Kenya being food sufficient. Food sufficiency is not food security. They're two different things. Yeah. Yes.
So in your opinion, where are we in as far as food sufficiency is concerned?
I think one of the biggest things we're failing is food security policy. Like today, there is a story that somebody was feeding on a dog. Yes. And it's an indictment on our food security problem. Because why do we allocate money to the strategic grain reserve and people are eating dogs? It doesn't make sense. And so the policies that we've tried to move around food security problem has only benefited a few, and those are the elites. The people who do big land farming, those are the guys who will find government incentives and they enjoy those kind of fertilizer subsidies and those kind of. But the basic average farmer, very few of them enjoy the government privileges that government is trying to roll out.
And you raise an important point that brings me to the issue of agriculture as a devolved function of government.
Yes.
And I'm curious about your thoughts about that, because if indeed it is a devolved function, then some of this, the logistics and etc. should have been able to trickle down, no matter where you are.
And that's a good point you brought up. The issue is that we fail to have an interdependence between national government and county governments. The agriculture is fully a devolved function. What remains at national level is capacity building and policy interventions and addressing policy from a national perspective. And so if you talk about Galana Kulala and those kind of projects, most of those land you'll find a community land. I think counties should be involved in those kind of projects. You talk about Turkana, where people want to set up irrigation schemes. Those are functions of the county. We talk about fertilizer subsidies. Those are functions that county government should be playing itself. It's not national government.
So we're saying county governments have failed
in
as far as agriculture?
No. It's national government that has failed to give county governments their mandate and functions to perform.
I see.
Yes.
I see. Wow, interesting. All right, I want us to move on now to the issue of unemployment, which is of course quite a big deal for us currently in the country. Now, a survey conducted in 2018 by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics indicates that 78% of Kenyans in the working age bracket, that's between 15 and 64 years, were economically active. Now, according to that survey, 7 million Kenyans were unemployed, with 1.4 million out of this figure desperately looking for jobs. But official data released indicates that only 78,000 new formal jobs were created in the economy in 2018. That's compared to 114,000 in 2017. That's marking the slowest pace of formal job growth since the year 2012, when the economy churned out 75,000 official jobs. Now, lest we forget, there's currently a growing list of companies that are undertaking layoffs to stay afloat. The paradox here, though, is that Kenya's economy is said to have grown by 3%, 6.3% in 2018. 6.3% in 2018. Where's the disconnect?
I think the issue is that the same economics issue. It's a supply thing, that government intervention and government performance in the economy itself has been huge. In terms of public
GDP
investment.
a real measure of?
Yes, that's the biggest question that now people grapple with, especially economic analysts, that is GDP a reflective of what exactly is happening? And so the demand side of it is that people are losing jobs. You talk about the private sector itself, interest rate cap has slowed them down. You talk about the companies who are retrenching, as you said. You talk about the general demand of people being liquid to buy products. People will tell you, like, maybe 3 years ago is not something they can afford today. And so those are the realities. So there's a mix-up and a mismatch that looking at the demand side and the supply side, because from government side, they are rolling out mega projects, and these will reflect in the economy itself. And so when you're doing a modeling of the GDP itself, that will reflect that you're growing at 6.3%. But the issue is that is this 6.3% being felt by majority of Kenya?
Because it's on a very macro level.
Exactly. That's the point. It's a very macro level. And that's the concern that about economists, that the macro itself doesn't give you the good picture of what exactly is happening. So even if you're doing the macro itself, analyzing 6.3, you need to look at the micros, about the sectors. Are the sectors performing together with what you're looking at the macro level itself? You talk about many sectors. I think it's only the banking sector that remains a little bit in terms of profit growth. Very
profitable, despite the slowdown that you just talked about at the beginning of the impact of the interest rate cap.
Yes, so most of the sectors are on a slowdown, especially SMEs itself. And one of the biggest things is the engine of the economy itself is within the SME sector itself. And so that's the disconnect itself.
So how can that be fixed from from the point of view of an economist? How can that be fixed? Because I mean we're coming from 114,000 in 2018 to 70 something thousand, 78,000 thereabout.
Yes. Okay. My answer will be in two ways. First, the interest rate cap brought unintended consequences. That private sector locked out and government dominated the local credit market itself. So we pushed out the private sector and government is borrowing heavily.
Yet government knew very well right from the beginning.
Yeah. So now government itself, when it's borrowing a lot, is doing a lot of projects. It's doing a lot of investments in the economy itself and public investment projects, social projects and all those kind of a thing. So you look at the budget itself, also the budget is very big for the taxpayer. So we are burdening the taxpayer with a lot of responsibilities of government that you need to your statutory obligation to pay your taxes so government can afford these services. So the best way will be, how do we scale down our budget? How can we reduce our budget? Then we reduce our taxes. And then we look at what are the priorities that we can leave to private sector itself to perform. So when you scale down that, government involvement will be on specific issues, especially education, health, the necessary issues which are safety nets.
Infrastructure.
Yes, the safety nets that will provide to people. So the money itself would move from government side to the private sector and the individuals themselves. And then it creates a demand economy where people now can perform better.
You're in the school of thought that says the government is not in the business of doing business,
yes.
Right? Okay. Tell me though, there's a lot, left, right and center conversations around youth and entrepreneurship, start a business. And it's being touted as a magic bullet, even though, there are people who say the same people telling young people to start businesses are people who are employed.
Yes.
So how do you see that gaining traction?
I think one of the biggest issue we have that, I think people have seen that it's replicated in a number of countries. You talk about China, Taiwan, and those kind of countries. But the biggest problem we have is our environment friendly even for the local entrepreneur itself? I think it's not friendly. Yeah. So you find that even if you're an entrepreneur, licensing itself will be an impediment first to start your business itself. You've not even moved to the capital itself. So by the time you're breaking even, I think it will be very hard to sustain yourself going forward. So I think the biggest issue, even if we talk about this, is about policymakers identifying what is the biggest problem that we're doing of doing business, not for the foreign investor itself, but together for the local investor. What are the kind of things that we can give to the local entrepreneurs to help them scale up? Yeah. I think it's very expensive if you look at licensing. For example, right now we bought devolved functions. A number of counties have brought licensing, which are targeting the youths and the entrepreneurs that we're talking about. You know, those are the roadblocks that we are trying to create. But at the same time, you're trying to tell youths that you need to invest in yourself. Self-employment is the way to go, and all those kind of a thing. So the biggest impediment for that, first, before even you talk about capital access, is about the level of preparedness of our environment for the local entrepreneur. I think it's not yet there where we needed it.
Yeah, you do raise a critical point. I was somewhere where young people were saying, you know, who's the next Bidco?
Yes.
You know, who's the next Manu Chandaria? Yes. Who's the next, you know, the big business? Is Kenya really supporting our young people today to be the next? And of course, as you say, the environment isn't supporting that. So how then can we create broad-based economic growth that will reduce unemployment? I guess from the top down.
From the top down. One of the main things, there's one point, the last time I was here I said something, that our economy is like a pyramid scheme, the way the economy works. So there is the top corporate, and then you'll find the middle and middle-sized companies. What we miss is the pyramid itself on the business side, that the local entrepreneurs who give that base for the economy itself. So the bottom of the bottom of it. Pyramid. And so how do we build that? I think one of the biggest problems we have, it's a strategic structural problem, is that many people align businesses with government obligations, especially in procurement and those kind of things. We don't have organic entrepreneurs. And so you find that even top corporates and the middle size, most of them, you look at banking itself, almost 60% of their earnings comes from government securities. And so how do we restructure the economy itself that we're able to build organic entrepreneurs and businesses and business enterprises? I think that's the point that I said earlier. We need to reduce the government involvement in the economy itself and leave private sector who want to make an impact in the private sector to perform that function itself. So the biggest problem we have that most of the money in our economy goes to the government side, and private sector also aligns with government. And so it creates an interdependence and not a dependent private sector itself. So structuring the policy will be that first we need to reduce government involvement within the economy, you scale down issues, and then create a very friendly environment that you can attract capital, that foreign capital that will help you not only bring investors, but help you scale local entrepreneurs in terms of capital and managerial skills and capacity.
All right. Yes. Well, okay, we will take a short break now. I'm in conversation with Tony Watima, our economist and expert tonight, who also says he believes the government is not in the business of doing business. Do keep the conversation going on Twitter. The hashtag is Metropol Debrief. The handle is @Metropol TV Kenya. Remember, we are streaming live on YouTube and on Facebook, Metropol TV Kenya. Don't go too far. We'll be back shortly.